All right, it is now past the hour of 7 o'clock, and the Appropriations Committee will be called to order following this brief message. This open meeting, Appropriations Committee, is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, the town of Northborough has been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. All members of the Appropriation Committee are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order allows the Appropriations Committee to meet entirely remotely as long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberation and the meeting. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Members of the public who wish to view the live stream of this meeting may do so by going to the Northborough remote meeting on YouTube by the link listed on the agenda. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will not feature public comment. Now I would like to take a roll call. So all our members, please say aye when I call your name. Bob D'Amico.
Aye.
George Brinkle.
Aye.
Janice Height.
Aye.
Tony Petit.
Aye.
Myself as acting chair, Richard Niebuhr, and our town administrator, John Kadir.
Present.
With that, I will call the Appropriations Committee meeting to order. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the minutes of June 18th, 2020. Do I have a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Seconded.
Janice Height made a motion to accept the minutes. Tony Petit made a motion to seconded the motion, and we will take a roll call. All in favor. George Brinkle.
Aye.
Bob D'Amico.
Aye.
Janice Height.
Aye.
Tony Petit.
Aye.
And myself, Richard Niebuhr. Aye. Unanimous, all in favor of accepting the minutes. Now I will turn this over to John Kadir for a review of the 2022 Budget Instruction Manual.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is our not our first meeting. We've had several meetings, including the financial trend monitoring meeting that took place on January 14th that set the table for our budget for the upcoming fiscal 2020 year. Now, we send out a manual as we do every year. This one went out on October 27th, and this is what all the department heads receive for instructions for preparing the upcoming fiscal year's budget. It gives them the timeline, the wage tables, and the basically all the information that they need to submit their budget request to my office, which ultimately gets packaged up and brought before this committee for review. So in terms of the budget manual, it's standard instructions that you've seen for prior years. Really, the main point is letting folks know that the goal here is a level service budget. Now, a level service budget shouldn't be confused with a level funded budget. A level service budget means we're maintaining the current level of services that we have now, allowing for normal contractual increases, including personnel and expenses, but that any significant expansion of services needs to be submitted to me as a supplemental budget and will be taking up resources permitting. So if you go through the manual, you can see the budget calendar is included in here, and a couple of dates I would call your attention to. The week of March 22nd is the required budget hearing, the joint meeting between Appropriations and the Board of Selectmen. So that's on March 22nd. We do also have, right now, town meeting is scheduled for April 26th. That's the fourth Monday in April. That is by charter, by bylaw, our regular town meeting. That date and format is still to be determined. My sense is we'll still be looking at an outdoor town meeting, in which case, more than likely, it will take place on a weekend. So we're trying right now, if you look at this schedule, the intent is to stay on track for a budget completion and town meeting at the end of April. And then whatever accommodations need to be made in terms of the actual day, if it's on a Saturday at the end of April or one of the first weeks in May on a Saturday, that's to be determined with the moderator. But in terms of our business, the business of this committee, the intent is to stay on track and get through our normal process. We don't want to unnecessarily delay town meeting. It causes a lot of issues, as you've seen, for the current fiscal year 2021. Getting things going 3 months behind just delays closing out the fiscal year, and it delays everything. So as far as the schedule, our intent is to stay on track, which means we're looking at weekly meetings of this committee to get through the various departments. We'll talk at the end of your meeting here with regard to your schedule. So we have a tentative schedule included in your packet, which we can talk about in a moment. But that's the budget manual that went out. You did receive it by email when it went out in real time. Just wanted to provide it again for you tonight in case anybody had any questions.
Are there any questions of the committee members for John? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, and that's the discussion of our preliminary free cash. And I'll turn it back to our John Padere.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this memo again was provided to you in advance in real time, but you as a committee have not discussed it. Moving forward, closing out of fiscal 20, which provides us with our free cash numbers for use in fiscal 2022, the year coming up. It's been an interesting fiscal year closure and it's had some significant repercussions for us. I'm going to share my screen for a moment and just pull a couple of the slides out of the memo that you have. So of course the memo is discussing the fiscal year 20 closeout and how things ended for us, but it also goes and gives you a lot of history and information about free cash as a revenue source and why we treat it as a one-time revenue and why we limit the amount of free cash or budget surplus that's used in the subsequent fiscal year's operating budget. So you don't want, as you know, create a structural deficit by relying too heavily on one-time revenues. So this chart that I'm showing you here is a 30-year history or so of free cash. I guess the thing I would draw your attention to is, first of all, that free cash, if things don't go well, you can finish the year out in the negative, which was the case for several years back in the early 90s. We haven't been in that position for a long time. In general, free cash will tend to follow the general economic trends. So in other words, when the economy is improving, we tend to finish out the year with a healthier budget surplus because revenues will come in over what we forecast, and oftentimes expenditures will come in less than what we had appropriated. But if you look at the trends for the last 5 or 6 years, you see as budgets get tighter and revenue estimates get pushed, you see overall the budget surpluses are dropping down. And in fiscal 20, which is the last fiscal year that we closed out, remember we closed out fiscal 20, we're in the middle of fiscal 21 right now, and we're planning for fiscal 2022. It gets confusing because I'm talking about 3 different fiscal years at different times. But this is fiscal 20 closing out. We wrapped up with about $2 million in budget surplus, and that sounds like a healthy number. It's not bad, but it's really not that great when you take into consideration the fact that we left $88,000 basically on the table from the prior year. So we really only generated $1 million in free cash or surplus from that prior year. And our goal is to come within 2 to 3% revenue projections and 2 to 3% expenditures returned. And if you've been at meetings with our auditors, you know that the auditor will say you really can't get any closer than that. That's the window. You want to be within 2 to 3% of your revenue projections and 2 to 3% of your operating budget expenditures. And of course, you have to finish positively. You can't have negative free cash. That's a very bad place to be. But as we closed out fiscal 20, on the heels of the coronavirus and the economy that was shut down, essentially, our revenues came in just right on target. They couldn't have been much closer. And so all of the surplus that was really generated was free cash that was already there that we didn't expend previously, and expenditures where we constrained budgets at the end to make sure that we finished out the year in a positive position. But this has implications because, let me see. Bear with me one moment. Doesn't want to let me advance the slide. Try to go into that again. All right. All right. Sorry about that. So the other one wouldn't let me advance the slide. So I'm just using a different file. So just as a refresher, this was the fiscal 21. The table at the top was the fiscal 21 free cash plan. This was a very unique year for us. We did some different things to get through the impacts of the coronavirus and the pandemic. And the first thing that we did, as you know, the Appropriation Committee's Emergency Reserve Fund that we appropriate every year, usually it's $175,000. For fiscal 21, the year we're in right now, we increased that by $200,000 because it was unclear where things were going, whether the economy would open back up again, whether the federal government would give us any assistance to deal with the pandemic, whether or not the state would be able to help us out. So to hedge our bets, we increased the committee's emergency reserve fund to $375,000. I'm happy to tell you, sitting here today, we don't have any drawdowns on that. However, if it keeps snowing at the pace it is, I imagine we may wind up with a snow and ice deficit to talk to you about. But as far as the coronavirus impacts right now, we're not running any deficits at the moment. The second line in that table, you see the $878,000. Our policy, our free cash policy, is to limit the amount of free cash in the operating budget to 1% or $500,000. In fiscal 21, because the revenues were dropping off, we made a policy decision, given the state of emergency, to use an additional $378,000 in one-time revenues to support the fiscal 21 operating budget. Now, that's something we can do in 1 year, but it's basically drawing off our reserves to stabilize the budget during an emergency. But that's not something that's sustainable, and it's something that we want to get away from as quickly as we can. Obviously, in the pandemic, we were unable to put money aside into the stabilization fund or rainy day fund. The good news is we didn't have to draw significantly or draw from the stabilization fund at all. So that was a good position. And then the real impact was that our capital projects, our pay-as-you-go capital projects, dropped down to $712,000 approximately, and that was a big impact. If you remember at the final budget meetings for fiscal 21, we postponed 3 or 4 significant capital projects in order to create liquidity and give us some space to maneuver through this pandemic, since we didn't know exactly how bad and how long we were going to be facing these shortages. And then last but not least, we usually spend down our free cash and we leave $500,000 in that account for whatever may come up unexpectedly. we left a little bit more money, $888,000. And it's a good thing we did, because as I just said, when we closed out fiscal 20, we generated just about $2 million in free cash, but 888,000 of that was sitting there already from unexpended free cash in the prior year. So now I drop down to the free cash plan, the preliminary free cash plan for fiscal 2022. As I said, we closed out the year with just under $2 million. So what we're intending to do under the budget assumptions for fiscal 2022 is to drop the Appropriation Committee's emergency reserve fund back to the normal level of 178,000. We're intending to reduce the one-time revenues in the operating budget back to the policy limit of 500,000, or 1% of the operating budget. Again, we're not in a position to contribute to the stabilization fund in fiscal 2022, but just the fact that we're not drawing from it, I think, is a good place for us to be. So we are looking at about $805,000 in pay-as-you-go capital projects and leaving $500,000 in the account. So we're getting back to our normal policy approach, which is $500,000 in the operating budget, spending money on what pay-as-you-go capital, and getting our reserve account back to the normal level. I think the big difference from 21 to fiscal 22 is the fact that we are immediately getting ourselves off of the reserve, the extra money from free cash that was used to kind of bolster the 2021 budget. So as you know, we did close out and set the taxes, the tax rate for fiscal 2021. And the average single family home tax bill went down by about $65. And that's because state aid came in higher than our original forecast for fiscal 21. So that's all positive. Rather than have a fall town meeting and spend that money, the policy decision was to use that to provide tax relief to all the residents and the businesses in town. So that's where we are on free cash. So in terms of the operating budget, we're back to 500,000. Your reserve account is good. And we are looking, because, again, we're not generating what we have generated in the past few years. The amount of pay-as-you-go capital is reduced, which means because in fiscal 21, we postponed capital projects. And now because we have less money in fiscal 2022, we're going to be able to do less pay-as-you-go capital. We're starting to see a backlog of capital projects. So not in fiscal 2022, but in fiscal 2023, if things don't return back with strong free cash, we may need to working with the Financial Planning Committee, start talking about possibly issuing debt for some capital projects moving forward. We have really been very fortunate that implementing our free cash policy since fiscal 12, we've done about $12 million in pay-as-you-go capital. We haven't had to finance any vehicles, DPW trucks, fire apparatus, school roofs, or any other roadway projects or drainage projects. We've been able to do pay-as-you-go on those. That's going to be very difficult in the next couple of years if the economy doesn't improve and our revenues don't start to improve. But for fiscal 2022, we're going to be okay. We're going to have a scaled back capital budget that's still being worked on by the Appropriations Committee, which we'll update you on at a subsequent meeting. But essentially, that's the free cash plan. The things that you should be hopefully happy about as an Appropriations Committee is that we've immediately after this very difficult year, we've weaned ourselves off of using financial reserves to bolster the budget. The other thing is based on the budget assumptions that we discussed at the financial trend meeting on January 14th. We're going to live within the confines of Prop 2.5. So we have excess levy capacity because we have passed budgets for years that are below the Prop 2.5 limits. So we have levy capacity, but we're not planning to use that levy capacity at this stage of the game. because we want to limit the tax impact for the residents. So that's the free cash plan. Those are the implications for the operating budget as well as the capital budget for fiscal 2022. Again, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody may have, but the big assumptions that we talked about that I want to refresh your memory on are one-time revenues in the operating budget are back to less than 1%. Our emergency reserve count that this committee controls is back to the normal level. We're back to spending what free cash we have on pay-as-you-go capital, albeit at a lower level. And we are living within the confines of Prop 2.5 and not planning to increase taxes by using that excess levy capacity. And then last but not least, the budget's target numbers that have been given to the general fund budget, the general government budget that I'm responsible for, as well as the schools, is a 3% increase, which is a level service budget. That's what the minimum we need in order to maintain the current level of services. So that's sort of the framework in which all the presentations that you'll be seeing over the next several weeks should be within. And I think that is a very reasonable framework, and those are very reasonable targets for us to try to meet. And I think it'll result in the lowest possible tax increase for us to maintain services. So with that, I will stop, and through the chair, I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has regarding the free cash plan or those budget assumptions that have created the framework for the creation of the fiscal 2022.
If any committee members have any questions, would you please raise, yes, Janice?
John, how are you doing on the self-funded unemployment?
On the unemployment?
Yeah.
Excellent question. We've actually fared pretty well because we did not wind up with significant layoffs. You know, we had proposed originally furloughing a few folks. We did lay off a couple of small part-time positions that were dedicated towards, serving the public, and the buildings are closed. So those positions we've eliminated, but basically we're okay so far. At the end of the year, we'll kind of see where we are for unemployment. One of the reasons why we increased your emergency reserve account from the 175 to the 375 is we weren't sure what was going to happen with unemployment. The good news is the school department didn't have any layoffs. We only had a couple of small contractions in our labor force. And so right now, I think we're doing okay. The biggest issue, frankly, and I would have a report for you with regard to our unemployment situation, but I'll be honest with you, there has been so much unemployment fraud that we cannot get accurate statements from the Department of Unemployment. And this has been a problem across the state. Everything is sort of, I think, the city of Worcester was getting 15, 16 frauds, unemployment fraud submissions a day. We've had dozens of them, and they seem to have slowed down recently, but we're still trying to wade through and get accurate information. We're not paying on those fraud submissions, but it's caused a great deal of extra work on the behalf of our staff to track these things down and to obviously lodge a fraud complaint. But it's had the impact of really messing up the data to kind of get a sense of where we are. On a typical year, we have $60,000 in the budget for unemployment, and I pay for, out of my side of the budget, any unemployment claims for the school department, the K-8 school department, as well as the general government. And most of we don't really generally lay people off. Most of the unemployment comes from terminations, or if somebody leaves here and they go take a job someplace else and they get terminated there, we're still on the hook for their unemployment for a period of time. So it's complicated, but right now, Janice, the short answer is I think we're doing fine. We won't see anything wildly over what we had budgeted, is my assessment at this stage.
John, I have another question. it is my understanding that even in the facilities that are closed, like the library and the senior center, we continue to employ the people that work there full-time. Something or other seems to not add up there.
Yeah, so actually, keeping in mind, the buildings are closed, but the services are still open. And so in the case of the library, they're doing curbside pickup. They're doing a lot of online support and online programs. So the staff is actually very busy. In terms of the senior center, keep in mind, we laid off, in the senior center, we laid off the part-time greeter and the two folks that were running the meals program, the bistro program, because obviously they were not open. So those folks were laid off. That leaves the director, the outreach coordinator, and the admin. And those three people have been working crazy hours because they're doing everything for outreach. And right now, we are in phase 1 of the vaccinations, which are residents 75 and older. Yep. And so they are contacting people, they're working on the clinics, and they're making sure that people get all the services. So actually, the senior center staff in particular has been twice as busy as they normally would be. And they're still running programs, they're just virtual programs online. When the weather permitted, they're running programs outside. In the spring, when weather improves, they'll run programs outside again. But if anything, I'm actually worried that the folks that I have over there are starting to burn out, because they are just flat out nonstop. The phone does not stop ringing for them, and they're just connecting people with services. But right now, the big thing is they're heavily linked up because of the vaccination focus on the seniors at the moment. They're linked up, calling seniors and actually they're actually walking them through, getting them logged in for clinics, and helping them with any of the online stuff that they need to make sure that they get the vaccination. So they're actually busier than they've ever been before. So I wish I could say things were quiet. The irony is, while people are home and seem to have a lot of free time on their hands, the staff that's here is actually much busier than normal, because we're trying to do everything. We're trying to help folks online as well. So.
Are there any other questions? You indicated earlier before this meeting that there was several of your people in the town hall have had the coronavirus. How has that affected your office? Put you behind schedule or hurt anything as far as upcoming events? Or
Yeah, it's been tough. So we instituted our continuity of operations plan, and essentially we divided every office up into an A and a B team. And the A team is in the office 1 week, and the B team is working remotely, and then they switch. And the idea is, if we do get somebody sick, that we'll be able to maintain enough staff to stay operational. I've said this at the selectmen's meeting. Unlike a lot of people in the private sector, depending on what you do, a lot of what we do, you have to physically be here for. You can't remote plow snow. You can't remote fight a fire or respond to an emergency. And even some of the administrative things that we have to do in terms of collection of taxes and processing of checks and things like that. These aren't things people are going to be doing from home, taking cash and checks home. This stuff needs to be done physically here. So far we've been okay. Frankly, the folks that have been sick have all gotten it from family members. So we've had one, and it's only in the last week or so, one instance of in town transmission. But everything else up to this point is really folks that are getting it from friends and family at home. So we've been able to maintain and continue to provide. There's been no breakdown in services, but even like the DPW staff, we've split them up. They come and go at different times. They don't have lunch together. I hate to say it, but if you're one of our snowplow drivers, our contractors, we don't even let you in the building. We have a very cold porta potty out in the parking lot. That's what you get to use. Otherwise, you're in the truck and you're plowing. So, these are all the things that we've done to maintain services. And so far, we've we've done well. We have not been untouched by COVID and the virus, but it has not impacted services to the point where we can't provide them. So we've been fortunate.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, the bulk of this meeting is unfortunately on poor John here. So we'll move on to the next, which is the state aid update, which we go again to John Kadir to fill us in.
So if there's, oddly enough, it's funny to hear me say this, if there's a bright spot in this process, this budget process, ironically, I think it's state aid. So as you know, historically, as a percentage of our operating budget, state aid has declined since the high in fiscal 2003 of 13.1%, and it has steadily declined to just over 8% in fiscal 21. And that's because our state aid increases have averaged about 1 to 1.5%, while our budgets have increased 3 to 3.5%. And basically what that means is, as a percentage of the budget, state aid has continued to shrink, which means it's made up by taxes, primarily local taxes. And so that's a negative trend. And we talk about that in the financial trend monitoring presentation. But in fiscal 21, we were concerned that the state aid was going to get cut considerably. And at the end of the day, they wound up level funding us. And that's why we were able to provide tax relief during fiscal 21 and reduce the single family home tax bills. Moving forward in fiscal 2022, we talked about, level funding. That's what we were hoping for. And really it all comes down to whether or not and to what degree the federal government provides coronavirus relief funds to the state. Because if the feds give money to the state, then the state holds us harmless on our state aid. So back in on December 15th, the state had their revenue consensus hearing. And the projections for state revenues were all over the map, ranging from 0 to 8.8%. Subsequent to that meeting, the Senate, the House, and the administration came to consensus that they were going to use 3.5% as an increase in state revenues. And so what that translates in for us right now, the governor submitted his House 1 budget on January 27th. And that's our first glimpse at state aid. And I had to say, I'm pleasantly surprised and happy that under his budget, state aid would go up about 1.8%. So, and in your packet is a memo regarding the governor's budget, and you can see the numbers. Just to remind everybody, unrestricted general government aid as a category, that's about 25%, 24% of what we get in state aid. That's basically our lottery proceeds. So that is projected to go up 3.5%. The lion's share of our state aid comes in the form of Chapter 70 money. This is education funding. That's typically 74%. That's only going to go up 1%. So that's why together, we're looking at about a 1.8% increase in state aid, which honestly, I'm tickled pink about, because we were concerned, not knowing how things were going to play out, that we might be looking at a significant cut in state aid for 2022. The factors that have allowed the state to project a positive revenue scenario is very simple. The vaccine. It's predicated on the vaccine being distributed and being successful. And essentially, when fiscal 2022, which is the year we're talking about, when it opens up on July 1 of 2021, that the majority of people will have been vaccinated, and that moving through the summer and the fall, we are going to get back to whatever the new normal is, and the economy is going to open up. So you're going to see this bump in the economy at the start of fiscal 2022. The concern that I have, and the economists have expressed across the board, is we're going to see this bump when the economy gets back reopened, right? And people start going out to dinner, and to whatever extent people are going to go to concerts and ball games and so forth. But the recessionary headwinds that we were looking at before the pandemic, are still there. And so most folks are thinking we're going to get this bump, and then we're going to see a very slow economic recovery. And, that again, just tells us that we're going to be looking in terms of budgets for the next, 2 or 3 years. They're going to be very tight, very slow, although positive, hopefully, slow recovery. And if you remember the last recession, 2008, 2010, we saw a steep drop off, and then the recovery, we always talk about profiles, economic profiles. Is it a V, a sharp down and a quick recovery? Is it a U, slow down, slow back? The last recovery, in my opinion, was a check mark, for at least in terms of our revenue scene. It dropped down fast and the recovery was very, very slow. And I think what we're seeing here is, it was a drop. We're going to see a quick bounce back up because of the vaccine, and then a slow recovery moving forward. So that's sort of the scenario that we're looking at. And I think the positive thing is the state aid and our revenues didn't drop as far and as long as they could have. But again, remember, when we made these projections, the economy's closed down. There was no vaccine in sight, and nobody knew what was going to happen, but it was all bad news, right? So as we get further through this, things are popping back around, things are looking better. But the main thing that's going to hit us in for the next several fiscal years with regard to state aid, other than tight revenues, is that the legislature passed the Student Opportunities Act. This is the first major reform to Chapter 70 funding in a decade. And the Student Opportunities Act is designed to funnel all new revenues for education basically to the needy communities, Title I communities. And so poor communities with high numbers of English language learners, that's where the money's going to go. It's going to flow to the cities, Boston, Springfield, Chelsea's, that's where it's going to go. Towns like Northborough, we're going to see minimum aid, and that's it. So for the foreseeable future, the largest share of what we get in state aid, which is Chapter 70 education funding, that's 75% of what we get, you're going to see a 1% increase in that for as far as I can see for the next 3 years on. So that's the reality we're dealing with. The good news is state aid isn't negative. The bad news is it's going to be minimal increases. Just keep in mind the whole recovery for the last 5 years, right, leading up to the pandemic, where the economy was doing really, really well and booming. Every year you heard me say, we're going to get 1.5% in state aid. That hasn't changed. In fact, the incentives inherent in the system now, due to the Student Opportunities Act, is that on a formal basis, they're being absolutely overt at the legislature that any new revenues pumping into state aid is going to go into Chapter 70, and it's going to go to the poorer communities. So from a public policy standpoint, that makes sense. But it just means that we aren't going to see much, if any, new state aid moving forward. That's just a scenario. So it will continue to decline as a percentage of our budget. In the next couple of years, it'll drop in the below 8% for sure. The good news, and I want to always end on the good news, is that in the global picture, the state revenues have returned and are projected to increase, which means we're not looking at dire situation where we're looking at our state aid being cut. We're just looking at very constrained increases moving forward. So, and you have in your packet the actual detailed line items of of the numbers and kind of where we've shaken out.
Okay. Are there any questions from the committee for John? As far as the state aid goes, what about school transportation? Has the COVID virus saved us any money with everyone being at home now on their computers, or is it still pretty much the buses have to run even if they're empty?
Buses have to run even if they're empty. During the shutdown, even when there was no in-class, they were using the buses to deliver meals to the students that had the free lunch. And so they were still using the buses for that small period of time where things were shut down. But yeah, the buses still run. regardless of the number of the kids that's on them. Really not much. We're legally obligated to provide transportation. There's really not much you can do there. But yeah, hasn't saved us. There's no money savings there.
Any other questions? All right, then we'll move on to our next one, which I guess a lot of people at home might be interested in as well, is the White Cliffs update.
So I'm not going to get into the details. There's a memo in your packet that just wanted you to be aware that the feasibility or the building assessment and reuse feasibility study is completed. It was completed in December of 2020. That the entire report is available on the White Cliffs Committee webpage. But in addition, the presentation of that report from the December 18th White Cliffs Committee meeting is also on there. And if you're interested, I recommend that you watch the presentation first, and then you can read through the report. The report is fascinating in terms of all of the documentation about the historic aspects of the building. Is a lot of great information. Unfortunately, at the end, the committee was trying to find a viable reuse for the building, and there were three final potentially viable options that we asked the consultants to put a pro forma together for. And that was one, as a municipal use, potentially a town hall, two, a residential reuse, and three, an event space. Unfortunately, when they ran the numbers for all those, there was a very significant gap in terms of being able to restore the building to its historic glory, as old historic glory, and still be functional. In order for it to be used as a residential, the main building would be more like a clubhouse, and there would have to be 5 outbuildings built around the structure to support it from a residential standpoint. As far as a municipal use, the historic part of the building would be meeting space, and then you'd have to tear off the additions and build a new, essentially a town hall behind it that connects in. Very, very expensive, probably the most expensive option. As you know, we have a feasibility study that's in the hopper for town hall that looks at renovating our current building and staying here, moving to 4 West Main Street, the old town hall, when it reverts back to the town in 2022, or building new, and the new site would have been potentially White Cliff. So they're all prohibitively costly. So after hearing this information, the committee basically came up with a 4th avenue of potential option, and that is to engage the consultant to help us put a request for proposals out on the street to seek a private sector partner that would be interested in renovating the building and reopening it, but not restoring the entire historical aspects of the building. One of the reasons why the 3 options that we looked at were so expensive is that the historic part of the building, although it's in fairly good shape, the code compliance upgrades were just astronomical. We're looking at $600+ a square foot to restore that. So the concept now, and I'm in the process of working with a consultant to move forward with, is to think of this in terms of the town saved the building, and we spent a little over $2 million to acquire it and to stabilize it. We've put a new roof on it. We fixed the back dormer. We've isolated the additions that were leaking. And so the town taxpayers, through the Community Preservation Committee, acquired it. So now if the town, as its subsidy, handles the acquisition costs, does this now make it attractive to somebody to come in and pitch some sort of a reuse to us, now that they don't have to pay for the acquisition and some of the stabilization costs? So that remains to be seen. So we will put the RFP out there and see if we can't find somebody. One of the things the committee had to come to terms with, frankly, is that I think the original folks that were excited about saving the building wanted to tear the additions off and restore this thing to its original glory, as I've said several times, that's just prohibitively costly. And I don't see an avenue where that is possible. I do still see an avenue potentially where we can maintain the streetscape, maintain the historic part of the building, but maybe the porch stays covered, the additions either stay or they get torn down, and additions are put back on it that make it economically viable. So that's what remains to be seen. That's the process that we're focused on now over the next several months. We'll put that RFP out on the street, and then we'll get a sense of whether or not that's a viable option. And but that's where we are on the project. So we do know the other thing too is we have a lot of great information. We have all of the interior schematics, all of the information about the existing systems. So if somebody is interested and they want to put a proposal together for the town to look at, all that information is available to them. It's already been done for them. Even the pro formas on a tentative cost per square foot basis have been performed, and so people have a lot more information. What we found happening when the original realtor was trying to market the place is there was a lot of interest. People were happy to come in, buy it for $2 million, figuring they'd put several $100,000 into it and fix it up. What they realized once they got in there is there's the $2 million acquisition cost, but then the historic part of the building needed another $4 to $6 million of renovation. And that's where the numbers didn't work out. And that's why I think a lot of people walked away. So in order to save the building from a historic perspective, it is going to require a subsidy from the community. Now, is that subsidy just the acquisition costs, or potentially people can submit proposals that say, listen, we'll come in, this is what we'll do, but we'll need additional assistance from the town. So that remains to be seen if that's the case or not. But that's the process the committee is focused on. That's the process that will take place over the next several months. Again, just in terms of I wasn't planning to go through the presentation and the findings. All that's available on the website. I really encourage you to look at it. It's fascinating. There's tons of great information about the facility, but it also provides us with an informed decision about moving forward. What's feasible, what's not, and the town's going to have to decide what it's willing to or not willing to add to the pot to save the place in the future.
And that's not really a nice dry presentation. There's a lot of wonderful old pictures in there and some great schematics and floor plans that really give you an idea of what the White Cliffs was and what it can be.
Yes. Yeah, the document that DBVW is the architect that did the project for her. I can't say enough about the phenomenal work they did for us. Gave us a first-rate product at the end, and in terms of a deliverable. And frankly, they went above and beyond what they were compensated for to get us to this point. So it's a great document, great information. I highly recommend that the committee members take a look at it.
Okay. Anyone from the committee have any comments? Seeing none and hearing none, our next step will be go over our meeting schedule.
Excellent. So in your packet is a tentative meeting schedule. I'd like the dates to be locked in. What's tentative about it is sometimes based on conflicts, a department may move around a little bit, but at least at this point, we're moving forward, meeting weekly and working our way through the major departments. So we have DPW, water, sewer, and solid waste tentatively scheduled for February 18th. The one I wanted to talk to you about tonight is on February 25th, we have the K-8 schools and the Algonquin regional budget in there. Now, I know over the last several years, we've been doing the schools on a Saturday meeting. If you go back, years ago, those meetings used to go very, very long. The communication wasn't always the best. But given the fact that things are going, the communication is excellent. The superintendent is bringing in his budgets within the target numbers that we discussed at the financial trend monitoring, if not below. I would, for your consideration tonight, respectfully ask that I think we can do those at a regular meeting at night and not schedule a Saturday meeting. I think we found the last couple years, we would order lunch, but we'd get through both schools and then we'd be waiting for lunch, but if you go back to when things were a little more difficult, we'd be at it all day. But again, the budgets are better, the communication's better, the information's better, the cooperation's better. I think we can do it as a part of a regular meeting on the 25th. So if that's acceptable to the committee, then we'd be bringing in Assabet Valley Police and Fire on March 4th, my birthday. On March 11th, we'd have the Senior Center at the library in. Now, the Senior Center, and we have a new library director. Her name is Jen Brunel. She has been just fantastic to work with. And our new, she's still new. This will be her second cycle through. But Liz Trediak, our Senior Center Director, she is fantastic as well. So they'll come in, they'll tell you all the things that they're doing and what they've been, how they've been adjusting during the pandemic to get services and programs out to people. On that meeting on the 11th, if there's any smaller departments that you'd like to meet with, we can add them in that night. And then March 22nd is the public hearing with the Board of Selectmen. And then on April 1st, we usually have the finance director come in, and we'll just kind of give you an update on the debt budget, health insurance, economic development update. And usually we have community preservation come in and present their projects because they've completed their process at that point. So that's the schedule that we have. Hopefully that works for everybody. It's essentially, us meeting on a regular schedule on Thursdays.
The only thing I can see is that one night that we have with the schools, maybe we plan on extending our hours for that meeting a little bit, just so it can all be completed in that night if need be.
Well, one of the things we can do, if everybody is amenable to this, is maybe we start that night at 6 o'clock instead of 7. I know a lot of times it was an issue for people that were commuting, but most people are kind of stuck at home commuting from Zoom. So do you want to start that meeting at 6 o'clock instead of 7? Gives you a little bit more time to get through.
Would anyone like from the committee care to comment on that? Does everyone have a problem starting at 6 o'clock in that night?
6 o'clock is fine.
Janice?
Yes.
Bob? Sprinkle?
Six.
George, I'm sorry.
Yep, good.
Tony?
Fine with me.
And it's fine with me.
Okay, great. So I'll communicate that to the superintendent. He already has confirmed that that date works for them. And I'm sure we're always happy to start a meeting a little bit earlier since we're here 3 or 4 nights a week this time of year. So, all right, so I will confirm that. We'll change that on the schedule to show as 6 p.m. And is there anything that's not on this schedule for you that any additional information or departments that you want to hear from or information that you'd like? We're happy to provide you as much detail as you would like.
I don't see anything at this time, but I think by our next week's meeting, if anyone has any, if we can all think about it, and if we go over the schedule, then give you a list of anyone else at that time that we might be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, as usual, you'll get all the detail for the smaller departments, but it's like I have a town clerk and an assistant town clerk, and depends on how many elections he has. I've got a town accountant and assistant town accountant. And I got a building inspector and an admin. I got a health agent and an admin. Maybe if anything, maybe a discussion on the health department, just given some of the impacts we've seen for COVID. Potentially, if that's something you're interested in having. But otherwise, the rest of these departments are one-person departments and an admin. So it's not a whole lot to their budgets.
Janice, did you have a question?
Yes, well, not really. I think John should be commended for making order out of chaos.
Thank you, Janice. I got to say, you know, you find out the strength of your organization when it's put under stress. And we have been put under an incredible amount of stress. And I am very proud. Our department heads, and I'll extend that to include the superintendent and his staff. Everybody's been working together. There's been no sandbox issues. There's been no infighting. They're just working great together, and that's made my job easier. And it's certainly made our ability to put documents together and get information to you folks that much easier. So, but I do appreciate that, and I would say that goes to all of our staff.
Do we have any other business or any other comments that people would like to make? All right, now would anyone care to make a motion to adjourn the meeting then?
I so move.
Okay, Janice Height has made a motion to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second?
Second.
George Brenkel has seconded that. We will take a roll call vote. George Brenkel, you agree?
Aye.
Let's see, Bob D'Amico.
Aye.
And Tony Petit
Yes.
and Janice Height
Yes.
and myself, yes.